Different types of coffee. When the coffee comes up here to be dried on this drying deck, it sits here for, depending on sun intensity, let's say 2 to 3 weeks. We rake it every day. On the first day we rake it every few hours or so until the lumber underneath is dry, and towards the end at least twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And I have moisture meters, and I monitor the humidity, and when the coffee is 11.5%, we package it up in bags and we store it in our own climate-controlled storage facility back there. It's a 40-foot container, and it's air-conditioned and humidity-controlled, and I keep my coffee there 68 degrees Fahrenheit and 68% moisture. And that way, according to all the smart people who've written books about coffee, such as Civets, the temperature, the quality of the coffee that goes in is best maintained. I also do something. The coffee that is up here, I put my coffee to bed. In other words, when the coffee is at about 20% or so moisture, I rake it together in a pile and cover it up with bags overnight, or when a big rainstorm comes, so that the coffee does not rehydrate. I have learned from photographs that I have seen, from cell photographs, as well as from very established, very well-known professional coffee cuppers, people who are coffee tasters, that coffee that dries evenly is of a better quality than coffee that dries unevenly. So I want to prevent rehydration, and I cover my coffee up, and then in the mornings we spread it out again. Although here on this coffee deck, of course, we have Lexan, which keeps the UV out, the ultraviolet rays, but lets all the sunshine in. And we have circulation, so the moist air gets blown out, and glass around it, so it doesn't get wet if the wind blows and the rain blows and all of that. So this is what happens here in the drying process. So the coffee that gets spread out here is known as parchment coffee. And parchment coffee, you know, parchment is coffee called parchment coffee, the stuff that dries here, because it has this tough parchment skin around it. Parchment is the thin animal skin that in the Middle Ages the first books were written on. And this tough parchment skin reveals, once it's husked, so to say, underneath is the green coffee. So this is parchment coffee right here. And parchment coffee doesn't smell like coffee. It smells like, any form of beans. So this is parchment. And then when the parchment is, as I said, 11.5%, we dry it, we store it, and keep it there for storage. Then the next step is we take the parchment coffee to a dry mill. Now this is a wet mill down there that I have, and the dry mill is a very expensive enterprise. It's a building the size of this building and costs, $100,000. I'll never have one. But I found a wonderful dry mill years ago, organically certified. The owner also has an organic Kona Coffee farm, and I've been going there and been very, very satisfied, and get my coffee dry milled at that dry mill. I go there with my parchment coffee, and the coffee is transformed into green coffee. And this is done first by husking, where the husks are removed, and then the coffee. This is the green coffee right here. This is a little old. This has been sitting here for a few months, but you can still see it's green. And the green coffee then, after it is husked, gets sorted by size and to some extent by shape, because with coffee, the larger the bean, the higher the quality. And there is, prime coffee and Kona #1 and fancy and extra fancy, and the largest beans are the extra fancy. And then there is also 3 to 5% of all coffee cherry, not of all trees, of all coffee cherry, random, have what in essence is a genetic defect. And instead of 2 larger flat beans like this, they have 1 small round bean like this. This is known as pea berry. And pea berry is the most desired coffee. It has a more intense flavor spectrum. the resources for 2 beans go into 1 bean, and so on, and they are sorted out. So my coffee then comes sorted out in different bins as prime and the different qualities and so on, and I sort out, and then the coffee goes on what's called the gravity table, where they are sorted by weight, and whatever is really light becomes trash, and then the medium, the mid quality is the mid quality, and only the best quality is the coffee that I will sell, as you will see. So what I do is I sort out my prime, which is legitimate Kona coffee, and much of the coffee that's not identified as any grade is prime, and I take my prime out and I feed it to our coffee interns, and I donated it to American soldiers who are serving overseas, not because I support the wars, but because I support our troops, and that's where the prime coffee goes. And the rest of it then comes out in 3 different grades. One is called Select, and the Select coffee, in my case, is not prime or better. In my case, it is better than prime. So the Select coffee is better than prime, and regardless of size. So I have pea berry in here, I have Kona #1, I have fancy, I have extra fancy, and so on, and that's my Select. The next type is the coffee that is Private Reserve, and Private Reserve is only the extra fancy beans, the largest beans we have, and it's picked through several more times by hand in part. I'll explain that in a minute. And then finally I have the pea berry that I have mentioned before. So then coffee comes back here as green coffee and gets stored again in my facility, and then the green coffee is ready for roasting. Now let me just say a few things about the age of coffee, which is very important, because coffee of course is an organic product, whether it's organic or not, but it is a biological product like anything that comes out of the ground and is grown, and over time it deteriorates. Very importantly, coffee cherry must be processed as quickly as possible. Coffee cherries start fermenting within 48 hours or so, especially in the heat, and they start to become smelly, and the parchment becomes darker, and they can actually acquire a taste of fermentation, which is a defect, and you want to stay away from that. So I usually stop picking at 4:30 in the afternoon, and then the same night we process our cherry, and then we keep it in the fermentation tank overnight, and next morning we start our drying process. You hear a lot of numbers of parchment coffee, how old parchment coffee can be. 2 to 3 years, I've heard a lot, but in our case, our parchment coffee is always less than a year old. Right now, I have, the oldest coffee I have is 4 months old. I will not keep coffee for longer than a year under any circumstances. I'll just donate it or give it away or what have you. Green coffee, again, I have heard people tell me that green coffee can be 2 to 3 years old. Well, that may be good enough for Nescafe, but certainly not for Kona coffee. Even in Kona, there are people who think that it doesn't matter whether green coffee is 3 months old or 6 months old. That is not the case. I've talked to too many people who know, who are scientists, who are cuppers, and all of that. After 3 months, you start to begin a process of deterioration of this very complex, wonderful flavor spectrum that we have here. So my coffee is never older than 3 months.